Hi everyone, welcome to Art Talk. I'm your host Liz Castleman, and today joining me in the Mott Community College Fine Arts Gallery, we have artist Christine Waters. Christine has been teaching and working professionally as an artist in the Flint community for many years. And on a personal note, I've known Chris for many years. As a former student of hers, I've had the opportunity to gain her knowledge and expertise in a field that I'm currently working in. So it's an honor to sit down next to her artist to artist today for this talk. Her work is in the Fine Arts Gallery from now until October 12th. Art lovers and artists, please welcome Professor and artist Christine Waters. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
How are you today?
I'm good and happy to be here.
Good.
And happy to be with a former student who is now an arts professional.
Yes, it's very exciting for both of us.
Yes, it is.
So I have a lot of questions today. Some are student body generated and some are personally, just looking at your show and talking to you. And what I'd like to start off with is a little bit about your background. So can you tell me where you're from and how does this affect your aesthetic choices in your artwork?
Okay, the first part of that question is pretty easy. The second part is a little bit trickier. Brian, could you put up the first slide? Okay, so I just picked a few little pictures from Neenah, Wisconsin, where I grew up. Neenah is a fairly wealthy community, although my family was really not fairly wealthy. But I think Neenah was a place where I could grow up and expect to have a very good education. And expect to have the kinds of resources that a lot of people don't have at a very young age. I mean, I started taking art classes when I was maybe 5 or 6 years old. They were offered to the local parks and recreation department during the summer. So I think my interest in art and in being an artist and being recognized as an artist started in a really an early time in my childhood. We get the next slide. And then I went from a very protected community, Neenah, Wisconsin, to the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1969, which was in the middle of a TA strike and the war protests that went on in Madison. Madison, for those of you who are students or younger than me in a lot of ways, you will not recall that Madison was a hotbed of political unrest. I mean, it was really a hotbed. I have a series of photographs that I took, which I haven't included in this presentation, that just show the students in Madison, the city of Madison, and rows and rows and rows of police officers with every kind of uniform trying to keep control of peace. There was a very unpopular president, Nixon, who came into office during the time that I was in Madison. Unpopular with the students, I should say. So it was kind of a chaotic environment. But if you can show the next slide. But I had some kind of protection from that because I was an art major. And I was not a political science major, and although I was involved and certainly knowledgeable of what was going on, I could go up to the 7th floor of the humanities building where the painting studio was and make my art. And my friends were artists, and we had a sort of community. And in fact, probably the most political act that I was involved in when I was in Madison was the outside of the humanities building was very severe looking, and it had on the upper floors, it had virtually no windows. And in the painting studio, the only window, and it wasn't really a window, it was this like sandstone wall on the outside, but you could unlatch and open up this sort of window-like area that was a fire escape, I guess. It was a way out, but it opened up right over the top of a walkway over the road, and I used to try to squeeze paint out and hit the police officers that were standing on the bridge on the head with paint. So that was about as political as I got. But I think
guerrilla art right there.
Guerrilla art. But I think, you know, all of those things and all that exposure sort of led me to think that it was a-okay to be an artist, because, you know, a lot of people have wrestled with the concept of whether to be an artist. So,
Sure.
you know, we were rugged individualists. We did what we wanted to do. I wanted to be an artist, so I did that. But also to be able to morph and change and include ideas that were important to me in my work. I think that led to that. That's the long way around my question.
Sure. Did you have any mentors in college or in your younger career that really helped shape your art making?
I did have quite a few mentors. I have some slides a little later on that we can kind of quickly go through.
Okay.
But I think my first mentor was my art teacher when I was a little kid in the summers. And I clearly remember sitting outside Wilson School, and I was supposed to be drawing a house. I was probably 6 years old, and this woman showed me linear perspective, and I understood it. And you know, from that was a mentor, not only as an artist and somebody who helped me learn how to see, but it was a mentor in terms of later being a teacher and being very aware that people are capable of incredible learning at a very young age, and at any age. And it's, you know, and that was sort of neat.
How exciting it is that to then impart that on someone else.
My sister, who was 2 years older than me, who was also an artist, was a mentor. She grew up making art, and I just followed her.
I can understand that. Yeah.
You know, my high school art teacher, Bob Eckholm, was not only an art teacher, but he was also an artist. He was kind of a jerk, but he was an artist, and you know, and he had shows, and he. And that was a sort of a mentorship.
Sure.
that you not only learned from people, but you also learned how to be those people. And then, you know, in college, all of my college teachers, but especially a woman named Sherry Urquhart, who was the first person when I was an undergraduate, you know, first generation college student. She was the first person who said, who asked me where I was going to graduate school. And she was a visiting professor, faculty member, and I looked at her and like she had two heads. I said, I'm going to graduate school, are you kidding? It's a miracle that I'm here at all. So anyhow, you know, she kept bugging me, and I went to graduate school, and she wrote me a recommendation, and I was accepted at Yale Summer School of Art and Music because of Sherry. So that kind of mentorship was important to me.
Sure.
You know, in graduate school, my major professor, I still have mentors now. And some of my mentors are actually people who have been former students. I look at them and, you know, and what they can show me about my practice now, having conversations with them. So yeah, you have to have mentors. It's not a, making art can be a solo activity, but responding to the art and having people help you with the art is not a solo activity and requires conversation and mentorship.
Absolutely.
So I hope I'm never too old to think that I need a mentor.
Absolutely. Was there ever a time, kind of developing your professional career in the 60s and 70s that you felt as a woman, your voice was not heard, or you had to fight extra hard to be validated in your work?
That's a really good question. So I've always been pretty tough. And but when particularly I was an undergraduate student, there were a lot of women that were also students who were not as tough as me. So in answer to your question, maybe, but I kind of made sure my voice was heard. But I witnessed an awful lot of instances where people's voices weren't heard. And I remember, and this has also affected my teaching and my attitude towards students, but at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, women were second-class citizens, women students to men. When I got there, you know, I mentioned Sherry Urquhart, who was a visiting professor, being a mentor and an influence. But when I got to Madison, there were no women faculty members. And when I graduated, or when I was in graduate school, there had been a series of visiting women faculty members, but there was still only one woman faculty member, you know, all those years later. But I remember one instance, and I think about this all the time. So being a woman student was put you at some peril. Being an art education major put you at further peril. And I remember one faculty member who will remain unnamed because I can't even remember his name, talking to two students who were art education majors, who were maybe sophomores. And he was doing individual critiques, and he was talking to these two at one time. And he said something like, well, you know, I have a hard time really taking this seriously because, you know, you're art ed majors and, you know, and you're probably just gonna, you know, graduate and teach for a year or two and then get married and never make art again. And those weren't the exact words, but those were the words. And a lot of times, unless you were made sure your voice was heard like I did, sure. Things were not said, but you were treated a certain way. And I think we've come a long way. I don't think we're done by any means, but things are better than they used to be. Absolutely. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about your art making.
Okay. So we're gonna have to flip through to, okay. Let's just go to the next slide. Is that the little slide of the little funny person? So I've been making art for a very, very long time. And the rest of the world is looking at something that I made, that my mom wrote, Chrissy, summer of 1954. No, you are not allowed to call me Chrissy. I've outgrown that. 3 years old. So I was making art and it was documented from a very early period. My mother threw away nothing. And could you go to the next slide? So in the next slide, I don't know how old I was here, but there's a couple of things about this art making that are that I can look back at my art and other people's art and see a huge difference. I was young when I did this. I don't know, 4 or 5. But one thing that you will notice is that there's horses, and the paintings behind there our horses. So when I was little, I had a fascination with horses. I did not ride horses. I asked for a pony every year for Christmas and looked out the window at the garage to hope that there was one there, but there was never. So there's that, and then also the fact that that tree, and I'm not bragging, I mean, this has to do with all the art lessons and learning perspective and things like that. That tree is pretty sophisticated for a little kid.
Yeah.
You know, little kids draw trees like this and then the thing on top.
Right.
So learning, you know, to look when you're having somebody help you learn to look. Artists see things differently than other people. So even as a young child, I was seeing things differently than other people. We'll go to the next slide. Plus, I was getting some reinforcement or some recognition. When I was little, there was one summer that I remember, and I was probably maybe 5, maybe 6, when polio was sweeping, you know, through the population, especially affecting children, and we couldn't go anywhere in the summer. We had to stay home, and the city parks and rec and, you know, other things, you know, because you couldn't go to the swimming pool, you couldn't do that stuff. So they did things like they ran an art contest, and I actually won a ribbon in that art contest with the picture that you're seeing of an elephant in a pit being stabbed to death by pygmies. Nice. So yeah, so I learned to see, and I also got some recognition for my work, and that was kind of important.
That's very cool. So tell me, when do you like to create? What time of day do you like to work? And
I know you had that question, and I think that's changed over time. One of the things, so when I was a student, my best time to work was in the evening, and I would work, you know, mostly because I had classes during the day, and, you know, and I always had a job. But I like to paint by myself in the evening. But then once I was through graduate school and got a job, and, you know, then had kids, and all of those choices are sort of taken away. So then you have to become very disciplined to be creative when you have time to be creative, and not on a particular time of day.
Sure.
It's very easy when you're an art person to say, I just, you know, I have no inspiration right now. I don't feel like making art right now. If you do that, all is lost, because your life is going to be complicated. My life has been very complicated. And now that I've retired, I have the luxury of having a time that I prefer to work, but now it's not evening because I'm old and tired. Now it's, and it's not morning because I like to get up in the morning and just relax and have my coffee. So it's afternoons. Afternoons are my time now.
Mine usually generate around when my child is napping.
Yeah, you've got a baby. You totally understand.
But I get it.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I remember making a watercolor when my kid. I mean, I may have only had one kid then, but we were at my parents' house, who lived in Neenah, Wisconsin until they died. And my daughter, Leslie, was taking a nap on a bed upstairs. And it's like, oh, this is a great opportunity. And I got out my watercolors and did a watercolor of the mirror reflecting her taking a nap in bed. So that's, you know, the times that you look for.
That's right. Those moments.
Yeah.
Special moments. So when you start a painting, Can you talk a little bit about your process and how you lay out the image? Do you work on the figure, the ground, all at once?
So it's changed. Can we look at the next slide? Let's see what I've got there. So I've worked a lot of different ways over the years. I think you're looking at a woman model sitting in a chair, and then a background of various things. So those, I've always, from maybe my second or third painting class, I've chosen to work pretty large. And if I remember correctly, this painting is 5 foot by 5 foot.
Mm-hmm.
And so my methodology for this was, it was actually a model in a life drawing class. So, so I had drawings of her, I had photographs of her. So that was the model. The rest of the things were sort of pulled together in a collage fashion, and then drawn onto the painting.
Mm-hmm.
These were oil on canvas. Go to the next slide. There's another one that was from the same period, where the people were actually drawn from people, but then the rest of the stuff was put together. Both of those paintings, there's a lot of pattern, there's a lot of stuff, and when I look at these, I think of the horses and the backgrounds in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I've gone back way to the beginning of putting things together that weren't together to make what I thought is a more intriguing image for a variety of reasons. Next slide. And during that time, I also did some kind of straight paintings that were sort of portraits, and I had experimented then with drawing the image and then doing an underpainting in acrylic and an overpainting in oil.
Oh, okay.
And I worked that way, for a while. I tried. I think I was learning to use color, which I've gotten, I think, a lot better at. I mean, my best advice to somebody who wants to be a painter is to paint. That's how you do it.
Right.
So next slide. That's my dog that I had when I was an undergraduate student, and that's my dad. Mm-hmm. And on the dog's head, there's a dog toy, which is a hippopotamus. So my dog's name is Flippo, so that's Flippo's hippo. This was derived from a photograph, and this is oil over acrylic underpainting. And during this time, I was laboriously gridding off the photographs, and then sort of the way Chuck Close works, if you know how he works, and then drawing tiny grid by grid, so I would get as close of a representation. And of course, this was all pre digitalization and pre ability to project images and stuff like that. So it would take forever to do that. So that was my method then. Next slide. This painting is huge. I did it. It was one of the first paintings I did as a graduate student, and it was too big to get out of the building, so I had to. It's like, I think 9 feet tall by 5.5 or 6 feet wide. So I had to dismantle it to take it out of the building to show it, which was kind of embarrassing. Wow. So that one fun story about this. So this painting had an acrylic underpainting and an oil overpainting, and was gridded off from a photograph and transferred to the surface and then painted. But one funny story about this painting was I had this wonderful studio when I was a graduate student. It was like half of this huge classroom in this old building. that was the old education building, just up on Bascom Hill, overlooking Lake Mendota. And I used to during the day, during the summer, open the windows. There were no screens. I'd open them really wide, and the air would come in, and I'd watch the people rowing on the lake. And one night I forgot to shut the windows. And if any of you are painters, you know that reds dry really slow. They're this, and this is a red painting. So I went in the next day and I looked at the painting, and it was full of bugs. Bugs were stuck that had come in the window over the night, and they were just like thousands of bugs. And I couldn't brush them off because the painting was wet. So the poor little bugs had to die in the painting, and I had to wait until the painting was dry, which was weeks before I could brush off the bugs. That's a funny story. But I wanted to get rid of them. Next slide. So this is another painting that sort of went back to the same methodology as those really earlier paintings, where I would have a combination of photographs and things from magazines, and I kept one of my mentors probably told me at some point, anything that visually interests you, throw it in a shoebox and keep it because you'll use it. And so I don't think it was in a shoebox, but I kept all these things, and then I put them together. And this particular painting, this is the U.S. Navy Sweetheart. And I actually had the pillow that's hung on the line there. The photograph of the woman and the child, they were from the same photograph. It was a black and white photograph that I did when I was at Yale School, when I was at Yale. And then the rest of the stuff was other things in the box that I put together. And I ended up really, really liking this painting. And I have no idea what happened to it. I sold it and it's gone. But I hope whoever has it
is displaying it on their mantle, probably. Yeah.
So then go to the next slide. Another acrylic underpainting, oil overpainting, combining things. And so during that time, it was graduate school, postgraduate school, I taught here and there, I made some paintings. Then I ended up with a tenure track job at the University of Michigan Flint. I also had my first child, who grew up during the first few years. And those of you who have had children and have had Barbie dolls in the house know that especially when kids are little, Barbies are really easier to undress than to dress. It's really hard to get those hands back in the little things, So a combination of things happened that can go back to the earlier conversation. One thing is I developed in our history course women and artists, women as artists. And the reason I did that goes back to our earlier conversation. I had figured out that the history of art had been pretty much written, except for a couple of monographs and things like that, without women. And I would prove that to people. I'd pull out my old Jansen's History of Art, and it's been corrected, but he's dead. His son has corrected it. Jansen wrote the entire history of art without including even the mention of a single woman artist. And it's, and I won money betting people that was true. And people would take my book and go through it and try to find, certainly Mary Cassatt has to be in there.
Right.
Certainly.
Certainly.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, that was the 15th century. That was completely men. Yeah. So there was that. So the idea of, so I was surrounded by images of women and trying to rewrite women into history. Plus I had this little kid that left Barbie dolls all over the house in really suggestive poses because it was easier to take the clothes off than to put the clothes on. And I sort of put those things together. And I started recreating famous paintings that were impossible, that were visions of impossible women that could not have really existed. They were too perfect, they were too whatever, and painted by men. And are you looking at the Botticelli? Okay, so that was one of them. And I did those in my first few years at U of M Flint. But in a way, they sort of relate. So they relate to the art history. They relate to the having the stuff. But then they sort of relate to the idea that I was doing in the very beginning with taking these figures and then adding a different background, to them. So there's the Barbie. And if you go one more, you'll see one more slide. That's the original painting. So, and then we just whip through a couple more of these. Then there was the Ophelia by Malay with the Barbie in the water.
That one's one of my favorites.
Yeah, Harriet Wall owns that one now. He used to be dean and is a very good friend of mine and lives in Traverse City. It's in her living room, and when I visit her, I get to visit my painting too. So the next slide is the Malay version, and then the next slide is Gauguin, Spirit of the Dead Watching. I replaced the Spirit of the Dead with a treasure troll, if anybody remembers those. And then the next slide is that painting by Gauguin, The Spirit of the Dead Watching. And then I did some watercolors, also with Barbie. Wedding Party, that's the next slide. And then when I did the paintings with the Barbies, I would have these Barbies all over my studio, like hanging from places and taped in places, and because I was drawing them from life, and but then I got intrigued by the tied up Barbies, so I did some paintings of just the tied up Barbies. So they were the bondage Barbies, and they sort of related too, to the idea of women in bondage and impossible women. So that thread was there. And then at some point in my career at U of M Flint, I was off and on an administrator and then a faculty member, and then an administrator and then a faculty member, about half and half, back and forth. And in one of my administrative roles, I spent a lot of time looking for space for certain things. And we were looking for space for the dance program. And we had recently acquired the North Bank Center, the university had. So we were looking through the North Bank Center at unoccupied space, because the idea originally was that the building was almost fully occupied, and in order to make it financially viable for the university to run the building, we didn't want to lose any of the tenants.
Sure.
So they would support the building, then as we could, we would put part of the art in. And that's still kind of the way the building is run, although there's more university stuff there than there used to be, and less other stuff, but you can still be a business and be in the North Bank Center.
Sure.
So anyhow, there used to be a restaurant on the 12th floor that had been closed for years, but then behind the restaurant and the whole floor below the restaurant was a health club, and it's now all art studio, but at that time it was empty because the university took over the building, and we already had a health club on campus. So So they closed that one. And I walked up in that space, and it's the most incredible art making space that I have ever had. And it was completely empty. And we tried to put the dance program in there, but I looked out the windows, there were these big windows, and I just saw paintings. You know, so when I got the opportunity after the dance program didn't work out there, I asked if I could, until they, you know, figured out what else they were going to do with it, could I use it as studio space? And it did. And a couple other faculty members, Daryl Baird was up there with me, and Jack Lorch, but it was pretty much mostly me. So if you go to the next slide, I made paintings from the 11th floor of the North Bank Center. And these paintings were mostly straight on. I painted what I saw. So it was in the traditional, it was very traditional, not put together, you know, various things, because I saw those paintings and I made those paintings. We go to the next one. There's Flint Vehicle City, and then the next one is 2 versions ago, the weather wall. For those of you who have been around Flint for a while, you know that the weather wall downtown keeps changing as the banks are bought and sold, that the weather wall sits on top of. And but it used to be the Citizens Bank building. It was originally the Citizens Bank building, and the weather wall was on top of the Citizens Bank building for over 50 years. And I could see it out the window, and I painted the weather wall. But my earlier roots came out with this painting, because the sky, of course, always changed and was never how I wanted it to be. I wanted a dramatic sky. So I found a sky somewhere else and painted it behind the weather wall. Went back to my old roots.
So let's talk a little bit about a little bit more about your process. How do you know when a painting is finished? How long does it typically take you to do a painting? And do you have someone that you bounce ideas off of when you're kind of stuck in an artistic space where you don't know how to complete something?
Yeah, I can. It's my process has been affected by technology. Okay, so let's talk about the process for making these paintings, and I think you can see a couple of them behind you. These are paintings of horses that I have known. Some are alive, some are dead. I know all of the owners of the horses. So the process that I used in these paintings kind of started out a little bit. I thought I needed to be a little bit more laborious than I ended up being. So what I would start with is I would start with a picture of a horse, and sometimes a couple of pictures of the horse, because one wasn't enough, but usually one picture of the horse. So we can take berries behind here. So I had a picture of berries, and I had this would have been what I first did. It's not what I did on berries, but what I did on actually, I think you can see Cooper over in the corner. I used this process on Cooper. So I had a picture of Cooper, and then I had I wanted Cooper with a kind of frosty, wintry background. So I went through and looked. The internet's wonderful. You can find anything you want to. So I looked and I picked the background that I wanted, and then I laboriously used Photoshop to put the background and the foreground together to come up with the final image that I wanted to paint, and then I projected it onto the canvas and painted it. So I'm not very good at Photoshop, but it worked okay. And I did maybe one more that way, and then I decided that I could compose those in my head, and I really could skip the Photoshop part entirely. So then my process became finding an appropriate background, and then finding the appropriate foreground picture, and doing my composition as I projected.
Okay.
Yeah, which was a lot easier.
How do you choose your backgrounds for the horses when you're, I know I'm kind of jumping around.
If we go through stories of the horses in a minute,
okay.
I can talk specifically about the backgrounds of each horse, but briefly, so these are all horses that I've known. Two of them were horses that I actually, one I owned, and he's no longer with us. The other one I still own, and he's very much with us. My daughter's horse, and then I started riding at 46 years old. I started riding after my daughter started riding. So I'll go back to those early pictures of the horses that, I saw her get on the horse one Saturday, and I was like, that was supposed to be my childhood.
I want to do that too.
And we walked into the office and said, do you ever have riding lessons for adults who have never ridden it? They said, yes, we have them starting Tuesday, or Thursday, I forget.
Cool.
So all of these horses, so I've been at the same stable, Wildland, my whole riding career. And my horse and my first horse, my daughter's horse, were school horses there. All of the rest of these horses are horses that have been at Wildland or are still at Wildland. Most of them are owned by my friends. A couple of them are school horses that are just very special. And so in some cases, the background is, and again, we can use these two as an example. In some cases, like in the case of Cooper, my horse over here, the background had more to do with him than me. That, these kind of white, loose frost just reminded me of, it felt like him.
Sure.
And sometimes, here's the other one, Barry's here. I don't know if Barry's likes tie-dye or not, but Barry's mom is, she's quite a bit younger than me, but if she would have been my age, she certainly would have been a hippie in the 70s. And she's wonderful. She absolutely loves horses. She adopted two older horses. Barry is very old, and she adopted another one, Godiva, who is no longer with us. Very with age, we don't know how old they are. They came to Wild when they were old, and they got even older there. But she is just a kind of wild woman. She's tattooed, she's opinionated, she's loves horses, she's takes a million selfies, she smokes pot, she is tie-dye. So Barry's background is more about Nicole than about Barry's. So
he looks like a funky horse too.
Yeah. Well, he looks good with tie-dye.
Absolutely. Yeah.
He's got the craziest forelock.
Is that what that's called?
Yeah, that forelock. But it is curly like that. It's not like,
wow.
It's like he's had a little perm in his forelock.
That's fun. A lot of this work has been inspired by artist Kehinde Wiley.
Yes.
Who throughout his career has highlighted figures that have been left out in traditional Western art history. Can you elaborate on how your work is influenced by this series?
Let's just, the next few slides are just, they were to have gone with some of my influences. So,
okay.
So, and then,
but then I talk about that.
Well, I think I
covered it.
I think we've pretty much covered it.
Okay.
But it might be nice for you to visually see their artwork. Some of the people. So I think the next two are Sherry Urquhart, who is the woman who got me into Yale, who made these huge hooked rugs of famous art pieces. And so that was her. And then the next slide is Judy Chicago, who anybody who has done any art that contains anything about being a woman or about gender certainly has been influenced by Judy Chicago. I can't tell you how many classes I showed The Dinner Party, which is a film. If you have not seen The Dinner Party, I'm sure you can find it on YouTube. Look it up and take a look at it. The next one is Joseph Raphael. I had a brief time that I spent in California at in Sacramento, and Joseph Raphael was. I went there because of Joseph Raphael. I loved his work. He did these huge watercolors. That's a huge watercolor. That's where I started graduate school. And after I was there for 3 months, he had really just hit the big time. I mean, the big time. And he came to us one day and he said, I can't teach and paint till my work isn't too much demand. I have to take a break from teaching and just paint. So I went back to Madison and finished up graduate school there because there was no point in me being. But anyhow, you know, his work influenced me. Wow. The next work is Debbie Butterfield, who is a sculptor. But how can you not be influenced by her horses? And her unique way of showing horses.
There's one in the Flint Institute of Arts if you guys want to check that out.
Yes, there is. If you, I think it's down at the end of, if you walk into the Flint Institute of Arts and turn to the left, it's down at the end of the hall, right?
Yeah, by the glass room.
It was in the sculpture garden, but it's not there.
Well, you know, the horse gets around.
So the next slide is an Edward Hopper. And influences, mentors. I mean, I didn't know him, but from the time I was little, I had relatives who lived in Chicago, and this painting is at the Art Institute in Chicago. So I had the opportunity to go to the Art Institute of Chicago many, many times, and this is one of the paintings that I could stand in front of for a very long time. And then the next is a painting by my sister, who is always has always been an influence, and partially to answer your question, who do I go to when I'm stuck? She's one of the people I go to. Janet Lorch is another person I go to, an ex-colleague but still close friend. Yeah, and you know, so now again with technology, if I'm working on something and I'm having a problem with it, I could just take a picture and send an image and say, you know, what is wrong with this? Something's bugging me, right? You know, so it's like it's expanded our ability to critique. Absolutely. And then we get to Kehinde Wiley. Born in 1977, so he's younger than me too, by quite a few years. And you were talking about what he tries to do. So I'll talk a little bit about his process, and then get to why my process. So there's a picture of him on the right, and with one of his paintings behind him, and you can see that they're very, very large. The painting that's on the left is very typical of the paintings that he did. So what he did was he's what you call the people in his paintings are street casted.
Yeah.
Right. So they're people from the hood. He was born and raised in LA. Ended up with a very traditional, very good art education in, you know, in LA and otherwise. And then eventually came upon this idea of street casting. He did some other stuff before that. So he would find a person, they're usually a person he didn't know, dressed in their normal street clothes, which was in the hood, so it was, you know, you know, backward baseball caps and, you know, baggy.
Casual clothes.
Yeah, casual.
Sure.
And he would invite them to his studio and he'd ask them to pick a background that he would like to be painted with. And a lot of people picked paintings of equestrian monuments or paintings that included horses, because a lot of very famous, you know, generals and heroes of wars,
Sure.
going back hundreds of years. And then he would paint the person. He would take pictures of the person in the kind of pose that they would have to be on the horse or in the background, and send the person off. And then the rest of his process included, in the beginning he did the whole paintings, but now he has studio assistants who paint the backgrounds, but he always paints the figure. So he would paint the figure. So the idea is that that these people, and then there were very often other backgrounds behind the equestrian monument that related, and that sort of had to, you know, to do with importance in history. And so we had this very common person. In the beginning, they were all young Black men. He since has expanded to women, and I think there's even a couple with children. But they were all young Black men who were historically not only under-recognized, but completely ignored. And he put them in heroic poses and made these huge paintings. I mean, some of his paintings, I saw one at the Brooklyn Museum a couple of years ago. When you walked in, and that painting must have been, it was in their atrium, must have been 30 feet by 40 feet.
Wow.
This, I mean, incredibly huge, detailed painting. I remember when the Mott Gorsch Gallery first opened, they had one of the equestrian paintings. They have it, it's somewhere. It's in their collection. And walking in and seeing that painting across the room, and my response was, I am so glad this gallery is in town. They have work like this. So with me and the horses, it's sort of an animal light version of Cahindo, because of course these are not, you know, horses have been recognized throughout history, but not these horses. So it's not as political as, you know, as Cahindo is in, you know, in taking really marginalized people and including them in incredible paintings. But by the same token, these are marginalized horses, right? They're not famous horses. They, a couple of these horses are off the track, thoroughbreds, but they were never in the Kentucky Derby. They were never in any derby. They were off the track because they were really not very good racers. Some of these horses are, so these horses were picked by wildmen and by their owners because they were loved and because they did what we needed them to do. So they're marginalized horses. They're not horses that sold for, you know, $50,000. Cooper, this guy, I bought out of a field for $500, right? So, I mean, he's cute as a button, but he's a, you know, a marginalized horse. So I kind of took the idea of, so that combined with the fact that I started doing these the last semester, that I had a sabbatical and into retirement. And so I sort of avoided painting horses. I was passionate about them, but I thought they'd be cliche. So going into retirement, it was like, I'm a full professor. I don't have to prove anything to anybody. I can paint whatever I want to.
Right.
So I kind of got this into Wiley, these horses, and then I started doing the paintings, and they weren't right.
Mhm.
You know, they were all that other painting that I did before. I think affected how they turned out, and you know, I mean, I hope you guys love them. I love them.
I do.
I just love these paintings. You know, so and a couple of the other things that I took from Kehinde Wiley, but not to the extent that he did. So his backgrounds were more. I couldn't get the horse to pick a background like he did. You know, he asked people to do these paintings. So then I had to kind of pick the backgrounds that weren't artistically heroic, but made some sense, as I talked before.
That's
You know, with the horse. But then the one other thing that I took from the Wiley paintings, and if you go back to that, let's see. Yeah, go to the next slide. You can see a couple of Wiley paintings here where the background and the foreground have dissolved in places. So if you look at the figure on the left, there's the guy, and then the swirls in the background in some places swirl in front of him, you know, kind of dissolving the background and the foreground.
Mhm.
And if you look at the one on the right, the same thing kind of happens. Mostly we have a patterned background, but then that background comes into the foreground, particularly in the lower part of the painting. So I really liked the idea, especially since, you know, some of these backgrounds had to do a lot with the person, and then some of them had to do a lot with the horses. I like the idea of, and I didn't do it as much or as masterfully as Kehinde did. But again, if you look at Barry's over here, if you look at the tie-dye, if you look at his legs, the tie-dye has dissolved, and the white of the tie-dye goes up his leg in an area. And you know, if we have a chance to look at the other paintings, I can show you where that happens. So
kind of a merging of the two, the
Right.
owner and the horse's personality, and yeah,
all of it together.
Mm.
And we can look at, there's one more, Kehinde Wiley, and you can see that happening. If you look at the bottom of the horse on the right, that background pattern.
Is that the one in the DIA?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't think I have the DA.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you go to the next slide, let's just go through the next couple because we already pretty much talked about that. You go to the slide that has the Kehinde Wileys with women. It's just an example of how he now has introduced Black women as well as young Black men, and in some cases multiple figures. But he's still using the idea of the background, the idea of pattern, the idea of dissolving the background and the foreground, and those things. And then if you don't know who Kehinde Wiley is, if you go to the next slide, there's a picture of him shaking Barack Obama's hand in front of the portrait of Barack Obama that he painted. And the next slide will show you that portrait. So if you thought you didn't know who Kehinde Wiley was, but you've seen that portrait, you do know who Kehinde Wiley was.
That's great.
So if you go to the next slide, I have this book that I found that also influenced why I did these paintings, and it's Dr. Seuss's Horse Museum, right? And it's a children's book about art history and equine art, and so I'm just going to read you a couple of things because I'm also a grandparent, so I'm good at reading books. So Dr. Seuss's Horse Museum. You can go to the next slide. There's one more slide. Art. What's it all about? And if you look at the top of that slide, there's a horse hoof holding up leg. So this is what art is about. Art is when an artist looks at something, like a horse, for instance, and they see something in that horse that excites them. So they do something about it. They tell you about it in any one of a number of ways. So, and it goes through, the rest of art history. What can you see? And then there's some contemporary artists and ancient art. Like Susan Rothenberg is a contemporary artist who uses one with horses, and then there's this ancient Mesopotamian horse too. But it's a great book. But what I got from this book is like, this is my view of horses. It's very individual. It's very personal.
Sure.
And I think, as we all develop as artists, that's what we should aim for, is art that nobody else could make, because you're you.
Right. Yeah. When you are working with these horses, traditional portrait painters would often make the subject look better or more attractive than they really were. Do you idealize these horses, or do you try to represent them scars and all?
I try to represent them scars and all, because it's important for me that they are who they are. So, for example, when you show a horse, and some of these horses get shown, not all of them, but some of them. If you go to especially a rated horse show, they are scrupulously clean, and you shave everything. There's no hair on their muzzles, no hair on their eyes, which actually they don't do in Europe, because horses actually feel with those whiskers. So I stopped doing it with my own horse, but
Interesting.
But if you look closely at these horses, a lot of them have whiskers. They have hair, and at least one of them, which is my other horse, you can't see that horse, but I'll show it to you if we run through the slides of the horses in a minute. Has a scar on his nose, and I did not take the scar off his nose. It's there. So the backgrounds, I think, are beautiful, but the horses, it was important to me that they are who they are, and that they're recognized for who they are. And so maybe I couldn't help it in some ways. I mean, it was important to me that they were beautiful paintings, but that they were beautiful paintings of these horses.
Another question that I had that was generated by the student body is some of the horses have reins and some of them don't.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why some of them have them and some of them don't?
Yeah, I saw that question, and no. No, it was whether or not they're in the picture. So then I, just tried to make them work with the horse. I composed them with the horse.
Yeah, I like how the corresponding color matches the background.
Yes, and that was part of, sometimes I would make a little change to the colors of either the background or the foreground, so it would all. But but that had a lot to do with what I was choosing, how I was composing.
Sure.
With technology, not painful.
Right.
Yeah.
That's neat. Let's see. And some of them have gates. Again, the kind of barrier across them, is that just how the image worked out when we took the image? And
yeah, I did take some gates out because they didn't work compositionally. If there were gates, and then in some of them, we'll see when we get to Colton, I made a lot. I took some of it out and made radical changes. to it. So yeah, it was, that part of it was not as intentional.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And then one of the questions that we got was particularly about the work behind me here of multiple horses with the toy horses in the image. Can you talk a little bit about where that progression was in your series and why it's different than the other paintings?
I just love the photograph so much. This actually was a photograph that was taken. The photograph was taken. So let me talk. I don't think it's a progression in the series. I think it has to do with the photograph and with miniature horses. So Wildman has always had 6 miniature horses, and actually 4 of them are miniature horses, and then they have a miniature. Then they have 2 miniature mules. But there's 6 of them, and they're sort of like ambassadors for Wildman, but they're all together. You know, the other horses have are together during the day, but they have separate stalls and everything. But the minis all live together, and they're all kind of together, and they all play together, and they're all they're like potato chips. You can't eat just one, right?
Right.
They're sort of a unit. So so I have lots of individual pictures of the minis, and I did, you know, I kind of wanted to do the minis, but then this picture showed up, and somebody who used to work at Wildwood took this picture, and I stole it from her. I should give her photo credit. But I just love the picture, and it made sense, you know, the minis that they're all together, you know, and so these are 3 of them. The one in the foreground, Percy, I actually gave Wildwood because they were down to 5 minis and they needed another one. So I went and found one and bought it and brought it to them. So that's Percy, the other 2. But then, you know, choosing the background, My Little Pony just made absolute total sense because even though they're horses, they're not ponies, they're miniature horses.
Sure.
Was that like multiple little unrideable? My Little Pony's never written. These guys aren't written either.
That's neat. Is there any other slides that you'd like to go through and show us before we wrap things up here?
Okay, let's just run through the paintings.
Okay.
So if we go to the next slide, there's a picture of me on my horse and one of the minis. That's actually Percy. Next slide, famous horses. Next slide, famous horses. Next slide, I just talked a little bit about the process. So I would have 2 pictures and the projector. And make the painting, which is the next slide. And then this one, before we get to the other paintings, and we'll go through this quickly. That's a painting. I have one of these paintings that's in progress. And that's Godiva, the other aged horse that is no longer with us. So a picture of Godiva, and then a picture of the rings of a tree that's cut. And that you will see that I did own is Bosworth. And Bosworth, I bought. He was a school horse. He was the first horse I ever rode at Wildwood. I fell madly in love with him and had to have him. And Bosworth lived to 32 years old. So the picture is a young Bosworth. The background are autumn leaves, which are the old Bosworth. So those 2 things kind of go together. And if you look at the bottom of his neck, you can see where I did the foreground, background.
Kind of interacting.
And then Tristan is my daughter's horse. And you will see, if you come to the gallery, that all of these are listed on, are identified as from the collection of So those first two are from the collection of the artist. This one is from the collection of Leslie Anderson, who is my daughter. Tristan is an off the track thoroughbred. Tristan thought he was royalty. So he has a royal background. And if you look at the top of the painting, there's a picture of a little person, and that's my daughter, Leslie. And then DK is from the collection of Tina Kinsel. DK is not owned by Tina, but incredibly loved by Tina. And DK, my little story about DK is actually a large pony, height-wise. And so he's like 14'1", 14'2" hands. So we had an animal communicator come out once and interviewed a few of the horses, and wanted to know what, and we want to know what these animals are thinking, and and I'm sort of cynical about it, but what she said about DK was, she said DK hates it when you call her a pony.
Huh.
DK says she's a horse. And if you knew this horse, that would be so typical. And the reason her name is DK is because when she showed up at the stable, the owner, and she's a grade school horse, she's been there forever, she's wonderful. The owner said, that horse looks like a donkey. So she became DK. Montana is from the collection of Vicki Gardner, who is my trainer, co-owner of Wildwind. Montana followed us back from a dude ranch that I went to probably almost 20 years ago with Vicki and several other women in Montana. And Montana was being mistreated and ended up at Wildwind. And that's why Montana has the Montana background. And if you see down at the bottom of the hooves, the little blanket pattern, the V's, the triangles are crossing over at Montana's hooves. And then Cody is from the collection of Deb Morrison. Deb and I did everything together with Cody and Boz. We trail rode all over Michigan. We took lessons together. We learned to jump together. And Cody was up for anything. So he has the kind of good soldier Escher background, which it's kind of clear on that one, where the background and the foreground go over each other. Fred is from the collection of Sharon Smith. Fred is another off the track thoroughbred. Fred is a good, solid plaid horse. Beautiful. Her daughter showed him for years, and Fred died in the middle of a lesson at 25 years of age. And if you are a horse, that is the way to go. And then Acclaim has this sort of royal Arabic-y background, because Acclaim is an Arab. He's from the collection of Jennifer Crane, my friend. Acclaim is from a line of Arab horses that were bred, that are still being bred at Michigan State. So that's Acclaim, but Acclaim is also Cooper's bestest friend, my horse. They have a bromance going that is like none other. And Acclaim is, I think, 32 or 33 years old now. And I just can't even imagine, he'll probably go before Cooper, and Cooper will be in deep mourning. And then Jordan is another off the track thoroughbred. He's from the collection of Laura Estilo. Jordan is, I have never met another horse that is so full of himself as Jordan is. I give Laura credit for riding with him and sticking with him. Fortunately, Laura's an adrenaline junkie, and for an adrenaline junkie, Jordan is just the horse for her. And he has the peacock feathers because of his vanity, I guess. And then we already talked about berries. So Smuckers is another Wildwind horse. He's not owned by Lisa Honig, but he's from the collection of Lisa Honig, because Lisa has loved and has been absolutely dedicated to Smucker's health. Also rides him a lot, not all the time, but rides him a lot. He's a head shaker, and she has tried every kind of medication known to man to help Smucker's, because Wildman really can't afford to do that, for a school horse. And this year he did really well. She's almost done it with him. And then Raven is from the collection of Christine Ravenek Davies. Christine, and when I painted this painting, Christine was riding with us a lot, and Raven just, I don't know, the roses made sense with Raven. She's very beautiful. She's very talented. And since then, and Christine would not mind me saying this, Christine has been diagnosed and is going through treatment for a very, very aggressive breast cancer. Christine is also she works at, she's an associate professor of pharmacology at Wayne State. So she understands her disease and her progress, and is educating all of us through Facebook on every step of the way. And somehow or other, now the roses make sense with Christine too. And then the last painting, well, the last two, Colton is the last painting I finished. Colton had a great career as a jumper with Sam, who was from the Ewers family. And then Colton couldn't jump anymore, so he ended up having a great career in dressage. And now Sam has gone on to another horse, and Colton is being ridden by Sam's mother, and Colton will have a great career as babysitter. So that's why all the ribbons go with it. And then finally we have Percy, Skipper, and Scooter for the minis, and we talked a little bit about the minis, and that's my show.
Well, thank you so much.
It's great to see them all on the wall.
It really is. Thank you for joining us today. And yeah, if you'd like to come see Professor Christine Waters' show, it is here in the gallery until October 12th. Until next time, good day and good art to you.